Wonderful. We're live about a minute early, so we're just making sure that everyone
Yeah.
can connect. Good morning, Cecil.
Good morning, Josh.
Are you caffeinated?
I'm pretty good. Yeah. I'm a couple hours ahead of you, so yeah, I've had a couple cups.
Right. I had a 7 a.m. meeting, so I've been up.
Yeah. So you've been going as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Everyone is waiting for NVIDIA to post their earnings report today.
Yeah. It's very interesting how that's. Hopefully, it's helping my retirement fund anyway.
Mhm.
Got a ways.
Well, okay. My phone says it's 9 a.m.
Yeah.
Welcome, everybody.
Yeah.
If you're just getting here, we're really happy that you showed up. We are Cecil Williams. Want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. I'm Cecil. Hi, everybody. I'm the director of training for Industrial Logic. I've been in the software space for a long time. I think wrote my first professional program in '89. I'm doing XP for 20 plus years now. When I first learned it anyway, and been doing it ever since. And big fan of a lot of the technical practices and things like that, but also lean and um, really enjoy helping people learn this stuff and understand how it can help them.
And I'm Josh Kerievsky, and similar story. Been around the software space since I was a little kid and started getting into it professionally in the 80s. Was deeply into extreme programming in the 90s, and we've been experimenting all along the way, constantly trying to improve our game. So we're thrilled you're here. We would love to get your questions, your comments, your
Yeah.
concerns, anything that you are interested in talking about. We have about 45 minutes for this topic. It's a topic that, I think basically is controversial for a lot of people. Um, it's one of those things that it can annoy people. They go, "What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Getting rid of the sprint? You're crazy. You don't know anything. You're just doing it wrong." There's a lot of that comes up, and then it becomes like almost a war between Scrum and Kanban. And it's like, at Industrial Logic, we couldn't care less about the names. Uh, we're interested in better software sooner, in getting a flow of value out
Yeah.
to production that the customer loves and that delights the customer, and that leads to a low maintenance costs internally because it needs to be well designed, crafted software, all that good stuff. So working sprintless, right? Agility without the time box. This is our topic, and I think it's great to start with a story. So, Cecil, I'm going to invite you to tell a story about an Industrial Logic client where you were helping, and what did you experience with their sprints?
Yeah. So this was a large electricity and gas company, and they asked us to come in and help them. And the group that it was myself and another colleague. When we sat down with them, we started asking them, we started observing and asking, where their issues were, and we found out they were doing Scrum, and they had chose to do 1 week sprints, which we thought was kind of interesting. And then as we started digging into that more, what they started describing to us was, they were following very much to the T the Scrum process. So they were preparing their backlog. They were then, doing their sprint planning, and then they would get everybody on the same page and have, all the meetings do that stuff up front. That was like Monday, and then on Tuesday they would try to do the work that was assigned. And I'm trying to think, the size of the team was probably 6-8 people. And then they would then come Wednesday, they were like, "Oh, we got to start preparing for the sprint review." We're like, "What?" So then they were like, because they had to prepare like a big slide deck, and then they had to like document everything they were doing, and of course they had to probably update. I don't remember exactly what tool they were using, but I know they had to update the tooling, right? And and then they would have the sprint review was like either Thursday or Friday, I can't remember. And then of course they would do a retro after that to talk about how they did. And basically they felt like they were never getting anything done because they were doing all the ceremonies all the time and all the meetings and getting together. And it was kind of like, yeah, that seems like that's kind of the case. And so our immediate recommendation was, well, have you tried just not focusing on following a cadence of a calendar that says because it's Thursday, you need to have this meeting. Can we kind of focus on the work? And when the work is ready to be demoed, let's demo it. Or when you're ready to start something, let's have the discussion and start it. And they had never really considered it. It was pretty liberating for them. They um, took it to heart right away because they were wanting to do something. They were really unhappy, and so we worked out, got them working that way right away and trying it. And I think, by the time we left, they were pretty comfortable with, um, not having those boundaries anymore. Um, and that was, I don't remember specifically why they had chosen 1 week. My assumption, if I was in, a lot of times people, everybody's trying to get stuff out sooner. So I think maybe they thought by doing a shorter sprint, they would get things out quicker, but it actually turned out to just slow them down even more because they just felt like they were doing things, uh, they were just repetitively doing all the ceremonial stuff uh, and not really doing the work.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. It's so this is of course like we see a lot of poor implementation
yeah,
of sprinting. Now, we call it iterations in extreme programming. They're the same thing. XP's iterations, Scrum sprints. Fact is, we don't do them anymore. We stopped doing them. I stopped doing them personally with my folks in industrial logic around 2007 or 8, or in that
yeah.
time frame. Um,
I think that's
you
about when
know,
I stopped as well.
yeah, yeah. This is when David Anderson had first introduced his Kanban system at a agile conference in DC, the big agile conference in DC. He had a birds of a feather gathering and introduced this thing that he was starting to call Kanban, um, which was really a breath of fresh air. And we thought, why are we beholden? I'd been doing sprints and iterations, okay, since about 1998
Mhm.
at that point. So you're talking 2007 or 8. And it's like, okay, what else can we do differently here to improve? And we were serving customers, writing software and supplying them with things. I remember HP had a request. They were like, when our students log into your e-learning, we want them to be able to choose their office, what office they're in. And so here's our list of all of our offices, and we want you to implement that. And that took about a few hours to do, and then we were ready. And by that point, we weren't using iterations or sprints, and we just did it and released it. And we would huddle together, decide what's most important to do it, and release it. We would retrospect whenever anyone wanted to. Now, that's an okay practice. You can actually have a scheduled retrospective. You can have cadences for
Mhm.
anything that you want,
Yeah.
even without sprinting, right? If you want to have a certain cadence, let's say certain executives are only available on certain days, great, make your cadence about that. If you fast forward to today, we do daily demos, and they're in little videos that we post often to a Slack channel. Boom, there's your demo of what got done today. Executives or sponsors or whomever can look at these daily demos and see what did we do. But the work, so the work has shifted to being very small and strategic. Usually it's 1 to 2 to 3 days in total time to get anything done. And then we'll present, of course we're demoing it and then iterating on it if there's more to do. So the window of time is very short. Okay, but we don't pin it down. We don't say it must be 3 days, it must be 2 days. It's in a rough window of 1 to 3 days typically, right? That's the size of the work we're tending to create. And that means that when we're working with stories, user stories, or whatever kind of features we're working on, we are slicing them thin, meaning we're taking stuff out a lot of times that's not important right now. And then we'll add that stuff back in later, right? It's from the walking skeleton,
Yeah.
adding flesh to the bones over time for any given feature or whatever. Um, so there's a lot of techniques that go hand in hand with working sprintless. It's not just like as simple as just going from you were working 2 weeks and now you just removed it, period, done. I don't want to oversimplify this.
Yeah.
So
I think, one of the things that I remember thinking back to when we transitioned from doing 2 week iterations to not, was we kept running into, and I see this a lot, where we get to the end of the sprint and we got a bunch of stuff that we haven't finished yet. And now it's like, oh, we have this commitment. And so now what are we going to do? And so we either got to roll stuff over and then, and then we got to adjust the plan. And then I remember back then, of course, we were tracking velocity. And so then it was like, we had this I remember it was a big sine wave. It just kept going up and down, up and down. There was no consistency to what we were doing at all. And I think that was where we kind of went, well, why do we need this boundary that says, because today's the day, we should stop. And now we got to close everything and then carry things over. And then, or do we keep it or not? Now we got all these decisions to make. That's where I thought the idea of like, what's the most important thing to work on right now that we need? And can we work on it? And then make that decision that when we get done with it, instead of trying to plan out, and so that's one of the things that I remember. I think we just see that a lot with organizations, that when you're following the sprinting things, it gets, the boundaries just seem to get in the way. I like to think of it as, why do I need the calendar to tell me when to do something? I want the work to tell me when I should do something. When I'm ready to do a demo, I want a demo. Why do if I finish something on Tuesday of the first week of a sprint, why do I wait until the following Friday to show it to somebody? That kind of stuff, right? Like, that's some of the things that I have learned that I try to apply and share with people. Is like, it's, it just doesn't seem like, but I think your point about, like, if there are constraints within the org about certain people being available and things, then that totally makes sense. But maybe you get demo from other people first, or feedback, right, through demos, and then you get it in front of the higher up stakeholders when they're available or something like that, right? But to hold things just doesn't always seem, it just seems like a waste, that things are, you're just delaying things.
yeah, and a lot of times we make assumptions about busy people, right? We're like, oh, we can only have the meetings with that person on a Thursday. It's like, well, actually, turns out if you actually give them a little video every day, they love it. And if you say to them, here's a place you can go where you can bring up the live software anytime you want it, whether it's in production or if it's on some server somewhere, but you can actually touch it, taste it, feel it anytime you want. And then there's these daily demos. Wow. You're doing work continuously. That's important. We've always said, if it's important, do it continuously. And so demos have become that way for us.
Yeah.
And, so I want to, first of all, thank everyone for coming. I seeing some people have been struggling with some buffering issues on StreamYard. We are actually considering getting off of StreamYard and going to another platform. So if there's platforms you recommend, we're all ears, but we are looking at another one in particular. So sorry for that. Glad to see everyone here. Shannon, Max, Dave, LinkedIn user, Laura, Dennis, Frederick, Tim. Don't be shy. And Max, we're going to get to your question a little bit later about the state of the agile industry and all that. I just want to stay a little focused on this topic for now. There's a lot of resistance to giving up sprints. I have heard people say, look, there's a 24-hour calendar, a 24-hour day. There's weeks that are 7 days long. There's cadences, and they're like, humans need cadences. And so by saying getting rid of the sprint, you're basically removing a really important cadence. And my answer to that is it's faulty logic. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We do continuous integration, right? We're constantly integrating code. Why isn't that on a cadence? Why isn't it, well, humans need to work on a cadence, so you need to integrate at some sort of regular cadence? No, when we have some code to integrate, we integrate it.
Yeah, I like to point out it's not called every 2 weeks integration. It's called continuous integration.
It's
Or it's not
continuous
every 2 week
integration.
delivery, it's continuous delivery.
So what's happening with removing this iterations or sprints, and we're not trying to be scrum bashers, or
Right.
it's iterations in XP, right? It's this concept of that you have to have a time box that's consistent,
Yes.
that's like considered to be sacred to agility, and it's just not. I thought it was really important in the early days, back in the late 90s and through the early 2000s. I really thought, who would ever mess with that? Until we started to say, let's experiment with it, right? Let's experiment with not working with one. And we discovered, holy moly, it actually streamlined everything. And we felt like a whole bunch of waste got removed. It was liberating. It was absolutely liberating. And the results were fantastic. So, it's basically important to keep in mind that if you're not regularly experimenting with your process, open-minded experimentation, where and believe me, we did some experiments prior to going sprintless that were terrible. They were failures. They were like, oh God, we don't like that. 2 or 3 different experiments I can think of, until we settled in on something that we discovered we really loved. So we're all for, you know, regular experimentation and learning. Our process continues to change to this
Mm-hmm.
day.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to keep up. People are like, well, how do you do things? Like, oh, it's changing all the time. Hard to explain it. Um,
But I think we do keep a consistent uh, idea of trying to have continuous flow of value, some sort of delivery on a regular basis that isn't based on the day of the week or um, something like that. So I think even though the approaches might uh, uh, um, get improved or changed over time as we learn things, right? Which we always do. We're still trying to keep the idea of getting value to our users, to our customers, our clients, whatever whoever that is, um, and it just like I I one of the things that I've learned over the years as I've gotten more and more done more and more software now is that there's a lot of parallels to when I went through my MBA program and we were learning about lean manufacturing, because when I did that, I went through it in the 90s. And that was when all the lean stuff was being adopted in the US. And in fact, I lived near a joint Chrysler Mitsubishi plant. And so I had a lot of people from Chrysler Mitsubishi in my classes with me. And so we were talking about it a lot. And the the thing that everybody was we were um, focusing on was how do we you know uh, get things to users and not have we were trying to minimize the amount of finished inventory sitting around, right? So when you have things on branches or you have things on special, or pull requests, whatever process you might be using, or you're within a time boxed, sprint, uh, then things are sitting and they're not necessarily getting to people. You've paid for that, and now either you're not getting your feedback, or you're just not benefiting from the investment that you made in building that. And I think that's something that I found helps communicate with non-technical people maybe about why the benefit of doing things a little more regularly is to get them to get the value out of what that they're paying for, what they're having the group work on, um, has been a good way to think about it too.
yeah. So I think related to what you're saying here, let's look at some of the potential negatives, right?
Yeah.
So this is Simon saying about Ron Jeffries, who was on the original Extreme Programming Project. about feeling like they hated it because it felt like a constant grind. I remember, I think when Kanban started to become very popular, Ken Schwaber was like, "Oh, that's horrible. You're going to be constantly working and you're never going to have a break." And boy, I hope, we don't go in that direction. Um,
Hmm.
I can understand that being a fear. I can even understand maybe Ron's experience of it. But in my own personal experience of working this way, it's never felt like a grind. It's never felt like that the sprint somehow magically gives me this breathing room where I can step back and take a break and then dive back in. Because frankly, if we value, let's say, retrospecting, we're going to retrospect. We're going to step back and think
Yeah.
about,
Mhm.
how are we doing? How could we improve? We're also going to work at a cadence that's sustainable. Sustainable pace is a
That was it.
concept from extreme programming.
Oh, the next
That
piece.
doesn't go away. It doesn't go away
Mm-mm.
with working sprintless. You're not trying to be in a grind where you're like trying to squeeze more throughput this way. You're what we're trying to do is remove activities that don't add a lot of value.
Yep.
And one of those major activities is sitting there trying to guess how much is going to fit into a box. We found that to be mostly extremely wasteful. Now, there's always a big picture that we're shooting for, which is where are we going? What are we trying to accomplish for this business, this organization? We call that chartering. Chartering is an invaluable practice of knowing what you're shooting for, what would success look like, who's part of the effort, how do we work together, working agreements, what are the risks we're managing, and so on. That's the big picture of what we're going for. We're constantly looking back at it saying, are we still heading in the right direction? But then, so that's big picture stuff. Then there's the small picture stuff, which is the everyday work that we're doing. And that's pretty much all we need. And we need to understand sustainable pace. Sustainable pace is acknowledging that we're not robots and that we need to have some energy at work and excitement. And so, so the grind concept to me hasn't been an issue. And people at Industrial Logic, I believe, would have never said, "Oh my God, this is a grind. I really want to go back to sprinting."
Yeah. I think
That's
I think Slack too, having the concept of some amount of Slack in there to account for unexpected work, or when things take it does turn out to be more, an actual item you're working on becomes more work than you thought. Maybe you're going to need to break it down and just do something. But like, I agree that the sustainable pace and the having Slack in there. Um, I think for me it was just not having that looming deadline, even though you may have a larger one that's further out. And I don't think we're trying to say that just because that the bigger project deadline, let's say, or whatever it might be, is so far away, you're not going to worry about things. But I just found that I kind of like my story about that utility. There was too much focus on uh, uh, you know doing the things within the time frame we were given, and are we going to make it, and where are we at, and always looking at that instead of just focusing on the work itself and getting something in front of people. And I just felt like there was, for me, kind of like what you said, I thought it was kind of liberating to not have that pressure anymore. And if it's going to take a day longer or a day less, it didn't really matter anymore. You just get it done when you get it done. And, you know, but because we're doing, you know, very frequent reviews with people, um, you know, back when we were doing it back then, we would have a lot of times we had our stakeholders sitting with us, and we would just say, come over here and look at it. We didn't even, we didn't even wait. A lot of times we do it in the daily huddle or stand up, back in the XP days, we would, even say, okay, we've got things to demo. If there were people that couldn't be with us during the day, but we tried to make sure we had people there with us. We tried to make it a truly cross-functional, and having even our stakeholders there to give us, feedback right away. And I think one of the things that was neat about that is once they realized that they had the power of uh, changing direction at any time because we could handle it, and we were not going to, go, oh my God, we can't do that. I mean, given within reason of design and architecture, obviously, but you know, because we all know people what they think they need and what they actually need is not always the same, and it just gave us a lot of flexibility that we didn't feel like we had prior when we were working in those, couple week boundaries, I think.
And there's some very strict rules, that have been in Scrum about what you can do during a sprint. That is to
Hmm.
say, what could be interrupted or not interrupted during a sprint. I have always found those to be um, insane. I'm sorry, but utterly insane. It's like, look, if something critical comes along, we're working on it. I don't care what we planned for the time box. We're working on the critical thing. And if we have to do all this accounting, well, we're going to work on the critical thing. So now we got to take the other stuff out and we're going to have to fit it in and make it all work. Who cares? Who cares? With when you go sprintless, you just work on the most important thing, right? I know Kanban has classes of service, and sometimes there's a class of service which is, about really really critical stuff. Like maybe it's a huge defect out there that has to be fixed immediately. It's gonna go across that board like a a jet engine. It's so important. You're just going to drop everything and work on it. Um, this style of working is much more adaptable, everyday adaptability,
Yeah.
right? It's not doing the accounting for what's in the box or outside of the box. It transcends the box, right? We used to say in the early days, escape the time box. The deadline pressure, the regular deadline pressure that occurs with sprinting or iterating, it's not as valuable as you may think, right? It really isn't. Once you learn to work small, now that's a skill that's important to learn. Most people, they'll
Yeah.
get something really big and they have no bloody idea how to turn it into something really small. And we mean very small, very, very skeletal. A walking skeleton is something that does not have a lot going on in it, but it's a full walking skeleton. There is a skull, there are the ribs and all the
Yeah.
different parts of the skeleton. It works, albeit embryonically. It's very primitive. And learning that skill is critical, right? To working small. If you don't have that skill, all bets are off, right? So yeah, that's the deadline, the constant deadline pressure. I've interviewed a lot of developers over the years saying, what happens towards the end of the sprint when you're not quite done? And they look at me and they just say like, oh boy. Well, a lot of times we just rush it out and we cut corners and we don't do the things we think we know we need to do. And but we get it done because a lot of people want to save face. They want to be like, yeah, I said I would do it and then we did it. Yeah, you did it, but what did you put in the code? What's the quality problem that's going to rear its ugly head either in production or years from now? So
Yeah. I recently was talking with a client and he was sharing a story about how he learned years ago the same idea that, he got to the end of a deadline and they wanted all the stuff in. So they crammed it in, but they didn't do it very well. And then when they got asked to make changes, it was a nightmare because it was so hard to put those changes in because they had done such a poor job of building the code to begin with. So, you know, you got to balance it. I definitely remember when we transitioned from uh, the 2 week iterations to not having the boundary anymore. We also got good at sizing things appropriately and breaking them down to where I distinctly remember we were at the time. I think we thought we were doing a pretty pretty good rendition of Kanban anyway, but uh, I remember that the person that was doing the prioritization, she got to the point where she learned enough about how we had been together. This was a group that had been together, keep in mind, a good 2-3 years at this point. And so that helps too. And uh, we we started. She started the person prioritizing that we were doing the work for started recognizing how she could break down the work that she wanted into features that were small enough that we could get them done in a couple days and get them back to her and she could use them. And she just started doing that without us. Even she didn't even she recognized it. And then we would obviously talk about it, but we would talk about them as we got to them. And it was very liberating that we streamline a lot of things, but I think to your point was we were removing a lot of the waste that we didn't need of having to, well, how long is this going to take, and do we need to estimate this and then plan it out, and there's just, how much is that actually adding value to the delivery? And that's what we found, is that we could remove that. And everybody's mileage is going to vary, but I think one of the things I would hope that we can convey to people is to try it, experiment, like give it a shot, see if you can find something that works for you, that's beneficial, that is different than what you're doing. Because if it's not working, you got to do something. You can't just keep doing the same old thing, because that's what kind of was, I remember, was our impetus to change, is we just kept feeling like we had the same issues in our retros, and we were doing the same thing, and we weren't getting any better. And we were like, we got to do something different. And
Right.
that's when we're like, well, let's try,
Yeah.
changing our process a little.
Well,
Pretty radical.
I want to acknowledge something too, which is that probably you and I have both had success with sprints and iterations.
Yeah.
Right? We have had success with it. It has worked. It's not that it doesn't work. It's just that we've discovered it's inferior to a more streamlined way of working, that there's waste in it. And once we discovered there was waste in it, we were all about, the only way we discovered there was waste in it was accidental. It was by experimenting with working without the time box that we started to see, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah.
That stuff, what we used to do, which we thought was so valuable, it turns out it's not as valuable as we thought. And so I'm trying to say here that if you're sprinting, it's not that you're a terrible person. It's not that you're just doing things wrong. We just have discovered better ways of working. In the manifesto, it says we are uncovering better ways of working. We're really living that here.
Mm-hmm.
And I know colleagues on the call here are also doing that. It's basically the continuous improvement, Kaizen. We're constantly going to be looking for ways to streamline, to remove waste, and to have higher value, and all that in a sustainable way, which is joyful. Not like we're trying to like squeeze every little productivity lever we can so that people are robots who hate work. That's not what we're going for here. We're going for graceful ways to adapt rapidly and deliver value continuously, and that's what's led us here. Now, I think, I just want to raise the fact that what were sprints invented for? Let's just go back to the very beginning of the concept of sprints. And I just want to read a quick little passage here. So this is from a book called Scrum, The Art of Doing Half the Work or Twice the Work in Half the Time. Okay. I think the subtitle is horrendous, but that's another story. And Jeff Sutherland, one of the co-founders of Scrum, basically said, in the early 1990s, the Media Lab was coming up with all sorts of neat stuff. This is the Media Lab at MIT, by the way, okay, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So in the early 1990s, Media Lab was coming up with all sorts of neat stuff. This was during the time that the World Wide Web was being birthed, and they were doing everything from robots to the electronic ink that makes e-readers possible to new ways to encode sound. It was an incredibly heady time, and I tended to hire students coming out of the lab because they were chock full of ideas, had an incredible ability to make things that were cool, and they could build them fast. Their speed owed itself to a policy that the Media Lab had for all its projects. Every 3 weeks, each team had to demonstrate to their colleagues what it was working on. This was an open demonstration. Anyone could come. And if the demo wasn't both working and cool, lab directors killed the project. This forced the students to build neat stuff fast and, most important, to get immediate feedback on it. Pretty good concept. It's a good concept, especially back in the early 90s when projects could take 6 months, a year to see anything. That's an excellent concept.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
So the concept of the sprint is a good idea. In the case in the Media Lab, it was based upon, are we going to keep funding you? Are we going to keep supporting your project? We have a heartbeat to make that decision every 3 weeks there. I'm all for it. You can have a cadence on which the gold owners, the people who are, basically uh, paying the money for your work, can say, we're going to continue to fund this or we're not going to continue to fund this. That's great cadence. But today, we don't need 3 weeks. We don't need 2 weeks. We don't really even need a week. We can do this stuff much faster and get rapid feedback and adapt, right? It's just the world has changed. I remember in my extreme programming workshop, we used to do 3-hour iterations in the workshop. It's a 5-day workshop. We would do about 3-hour iterations. Each one was just working under a microscope. Every little bad decision is magnified, and then you start to hone your craft, right? Those are very, very short iterations. Yeah, the world's changed. We've gotten much more micro than we were in the early 90s when this idea was birthed.
Yeah. And I think that kind of fits in with what Simon commented, that one of the things that's kind of a key piece to this, I agree with what he said, which is
Yes.
that you have a need for effective and efficient collaboration. That's one of the things that I think when you change this process, just agile in general, but or doing flow-based work in general, but you have to have constant feedback from the users, and in past lives when we did things waterfall or whatever, right? It was somebody writes up what they want, they spend months, years doing it, hand it off to you, and then they wait for you to give it back to them when you're done, years later, whatever that would take. I can remember taking a long time. And I also remember, reading things and going, I don't think that's really what they want. And I thought I knew better, and I would just make what I wanted, what I thought was going to be the right thing. Right. And then, 18 months later, they get it and they go, that's not what we asked for. And so having product people that are representing the customers, or even better, the customers themselves, be able to be involved and interacting with you on a regular basis is necessary to make this really work well. But you need that with 2-week sprints too. I mean, you're just scheduling them on a specific day and time. And as we start off with this, you could still do that, but you ideally want to have more interaction than that. You want to have people, and I have found that once they recognize, as I said a second ago, the power behind being able to be involved, they cherish it and they do try to, they leverage that. But they're going to initially say they don't have the time for it. I've ran into that a lot. And but you got to, my experience is you got to get them to recognize this is to their benefit. They're the ones that are going to benefit from working with you more closely, because they're going to get what they want more accurately and sooner. So it's something you got to get them to recognize.
I mean, I think in Simon's point about how this only can work with effective and efficient collaboration, I mean, we need that regardless of whether we're sprinting or not sprinting.
Yeah.
You need the effective collaboration. It's almost like this is orthogonal to that. Like, we know if people don't have good software programming skills, you're not going to get a good result, regardless of whether you're sprinting or not sprinting. We know if you're not collaborating well and not clear on what the heck you're supposed to be building, it doesn't matter if you're sprinting or not sprinting. This is basically, this move to working without the time box is simply an optimization on what we already do. It's a way to remove some more waste as we see it. That's all it really is. But yes, there's all this other stuff that comes along with it that we've been talking about a little bit here, whether it's splitting stories, right? I used to say, favor splitting over sprinting. Get better at splitting. I'd rather have teams get better at splitting and learning how to split big things into small things rather than sprinting. Too many people say we're agile because we're sprinting, and we do the stand-up meetings and we do the ceremonies and we're agile, and that's just pathetic. I mean, it's really pathetic. So this kind of focus on the time box has become ridiculous in terms of the identity for agile as being that's being the identity. That's nonsense. That's not agility. So yeah, I do want to mention a couple of points here. Max had asked something much earlier in the conversation about the pushback in the industry. A lot of agile coaches have been let go. Agile Conference is reimagining agile. Do you see changes in the industry for agile or for the agile scaling frameworks?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, right? I mean, I think we're definitely seeing changes. What is it going to end up? That's I think that's still to be written. Uh, I mean, I think my approach has always been certainly as a coach, and even when I was a team member, and when I worked with NIL, it's like what I don't ever try to prescribe anything in particular. It's trying to figure out what's going to work for us, given our team makeup, what we need to do, what we need to get done, and trying to be flexible about it. But again, back to that underlying theme of continuous delivery of better software sooner, right? That's uh, to quote our tagline, I guess. But um, if I could predict the future, I probably wouldn't be in this meeting right now.
You'd be a stock market
In
trader.
real honesty, right? I would, but you know, I think we've seen a lot with the automation. I think right in the recent times that's helped a lot. I think the tooling for collaboration, the ability to have these kinds of conversations remotely helps with the collaboration stuff, right? Because prior to the pandemic, right, everybody felt you had to be in person together to really have effective collaboration, and now we know that that's not the case. I mean, most of us probably may still prefer face to face over this, but the tools have gotten pretty good, so that you can still have conversations with people halfway around the world. We work with clients that do that, and it works. It's not impossible. So I think continuing to work on the collaboration, continuing to um, you know I think this working small is another big thing that Josh has talked about a bunch. When I do training, I'm always talking about that is how can you break something down and get something out. You know, I
I mean, it
know.
comes back to the sprinting. The reason
Yeah,
for the birth of sprinting was those people at MIT were saying, are they building something cool? Does it work? Should we keep funding it?
useful.
Right?
Yeah,
Let's give them some feedback. Right? These are good things. It's a very good idea from led to the birth of sprinting. But then we got crazy, which is like there's the pre-sprint planning, and then there's the all of the work that goes into pre-sprint planning and getting that sprint ready, and then all of the velocity calculations and all the crazy stuff that goes into estimating. And there's been a whole crop of stuff that's grown up around this sprint, which I'm sure was not there during the Media Lab days. um, and it's gotten a little crazy. Developers are actually a lot happier when they're not in all those meetings. And not to say you don't need some meetings, but it gets a little nuts. um, we have a few minutes left, about 3 minutes left here. So I just want to, you know, be as focused as we can.
there was one comment about is this a maturity thing? I think that's what Alexander's asking
Yeah.
is this is this something that comes with maturity? Because we've talked about a lot in cases that we grew into this. And I will quickly say that we teach a month long boot camp for new hires for companies where I just teach them this way of working right off the bat. We don't get into, we don't do any boundaries. Uh, we just immediately start doing ensemble. We start doing TDD. We start doing, sprintless, and we focus on the first thing we want to get delivered. That's a walking skeleton, and then we add to it, and we usually end up building an app in about a week out of that month. And in one case, I've had a group that built something that the client thought was better than their actual working product because we copied something that they already had to give us a subject matter to build, an app to build, and they actually thought it was better. So uh, I don't necessarily think it needs to be maturity, but I do think people have experience that they bring to the table that affects their viewpoints on what they understand works or doesn't work or what they've read, right? Um,
Yeah. And let me add that I think a lot of agilists started out sprinting or iterating. And so they believe that since that's how they started, just the way I learned to ride a bike on training wheels. Well,
mm,
my kids are going to ride a bike on training wheels too. That's how I learn. Unless you're open-minded enough to observe, hey, well, there's parents with kids that are on these little push bikes. Why don't I try that? And I did for my youngest daughter, and it was a wonderful thing. So yeah, we don't believe, as Tim's saying here, we don't find that that we seriously don't think that anyone needs to sprint in order to learn not to, because so many people are like, well, we're going to start them on the sprinting and the scrum because that's the training wheels, and then we're gonna migrate off of that. Well, how does that work out? We find it doesn't work out well at all. The sprints and the scrum mentality gets across the organization. Try getting rid of it. They don't want to. They're like, we invested all this time and energy, and why are you telling us to get rid of this now? We start without sprints with newbies all the time.
Mhm.
And it's a much easier adoption. There's far less friction. There's a reason we have moved to this model. We get better results with it. So
Yep.
we are about at the end. I'm sorry we didn't get to everyone's comments here. This is a long topic, and it raises all kinds of things. We tried to touch on the major ones. So, if you haven't worked without sprints, please give it a try. Do it on something safe, maybe something that's not so important at first. See what it feels like, right? Ask questions about your experience. And if you're in a shop that's just married to Scrum, even there, maybe say, could we just try one project where we do this and just see it? We could always go back to the old way, So is that feasible for us?
Yeah.
We were delighted. We didn't know the benefits that would happen from working Sprintless until we actually tried it. It wasn't like we read it in a book and then did it. We had to experiment and experience it to really understand. So
Yeah, I was just gonna say that's exactly how I went from waterfall to XP. It was an experiment. We
right.
thought, let's try it. We want to see something else.
Yes.
Um,
Excellent. Well, thanks everyone
yeah,
for
thank you.
coming. This will be online on YouTube and on one of our pages on Industrial Logic's website. And we'll be back for more fun next week and every week thereafter on Wednesdays. So thanks again for coming.
Yeah,
See ya.
it's great to see everyone. Thank you.